Hey guys, how's it going? So I figured I would throw you guys a curveball and start the video by showing you the end result of this little project that I've been working on for the past month. And yes, this is really made out of hot glue. And why hot glue, you may ask? Well, why not? It seems recently I've been really inspired by these weird materials, and I figured I would keep the ball rolling and mainly keep myself entertained. So if you want to see a lure made out of hot glue that actually catches fish, stick around and I'll show you how to make one. Alright, let's get started. If you are a regular viewer of mine, you might remember that bait that I made last year out of paper that had the same backlip design as this one has. And I figured I would update the whole concept and take it a little bit further with this bait, adding all kinds of cool carvings and make it look fancier, really. And also address one major design flaw that I had with the bait, and that is the backlip itself, which might get really easily damaged if you happen to throw it into something hard, like a rock or a bridge pylon. And you don't really have that problem when the material that you make the lure out of is soft. You know, the reason why I like making fishing lures is that I get to challenge myself in a variety of different ways, and because of that, I decided to limit the use of power tools for this one and keep things manual as possible. That way I feel like I become less reliant on machines that limit my other skills that I want to improve upon. And also I just wanted to show that you can do it and make do without using excessive amount of power tools. So there are a few spots on the bait that I couldn't get to with the handsaw, so I'm just getting rid of the excess material with a rasp. Now I probably could have left the surface rough and moved on to the next stage, but I decided it doesn't really hurt if I actually sand them down and make everything nice and smooth. So that's exactly what I did. In order to make the upper profile symmetrical, I need to make a center line, so that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm marking a spot on the center of the bait, and then I'm just going to use a pen to draw the line here. Now that I have the center line drawn, I'm going to drill some holes to accommodate the hook and line tie. I'm sure most of you already gathered that I'm making a mold master right now, and the wood that I use for that is maple. And as you can see, it's pretty tough wood to carve, but I kind of prefer that because that's kind of what you want to have if you're doing small fine detail, which I will be doing later on. Once I was done with the upper profile, I started to contour the bait, and I decided to go with a V-shape again. I feel like I do this a lot recently with my baits, but having that V-shape really translates well into having a lot of belly flash, and I feel like this sort of backlip lure definitely benefits from that. Once I was done with the knife work, it was just a matter of getting everything nice and smooth and ready for carving. So I started with a grit 60 and moved on to grit 100, and I even went to grit 240 to make sure that everything is really nice and smooth and easy to start carving on. Alright, let's start carving. For this project I decided to try to loosely imitate the common bleak, which as the name already suggests is a very common coarse fish species here in Europe, and also even in Western Asia. They usually live in great big shoals and feed upon small mollusks, larvae, worms and even dead plants. The common bleak is a very important food source for the predatory species like the pike, so of course I'm gonna take advantage of that and try to make something that the pike will want to nibble on. So I guess I should talk a little bit about the carving itself and how I do it. It's pretty straightforward, really. I mean, I've done a whole bunch of different videos about this already, and I feel like I'm going to be repeating myself like a parrot here. But basically, what I do is I cut up the template that I've made earlier and use those pieces to transfer lines along the bait, and then cut along those lines and bring out the details. And usually I start with the head and then moved on to the scales and the fins. So I don't think I'm gonna talk too much about it after this. So maybe I'll throw in some music or something to make it more enjoyable to watch, because I do want to include that into the video too, because it's kind of cool. Alright, now that the most of the carving is done, only thing I need to do now is to make the lateral line. And the easiest way to do that is to basically just stab the bait with my knife. And that will create those small tiny holes that will then resemble a lateral line. Something that's not really that necessary, but I kind of like doing that nowadays. Just adds a little bit more realism to the bait itself. Alright, the last thing that I'm going to do is make the tail, and I'm using 5mm thick Lexan polycarbonate sheet for this one. And then I'm just going to cut it to a rectangular shape with my handsaw. And I have to admit, I did deviate from my original plan not to use any kind of power tools with this project, but at this point I was just so eager to get everything done, so I just ended up rounding all of the round edges with my rotary multi-tool. After the tail was done, I felt like it was pretty fitting to use hot glue to actually glue the tail onto the mold master, so that's exactly what I ended up doing. At this point I figured I wanted to have a smooth transition between the tail blade and the body of the bait, so I mixed some plastic putty and started to make that transition. Once the plastic putty was cured enough, I started to take off the excess material with my knife. I rolled a piece of sanding paper to a cylinder shape and used that to sand the plastic putty. Next I added some super glue to the holes that I drilled earlier for the mock-up hook and line ties that I will be then attaching to those holes. One last thing I wanted to do for the mold master before molding it, and that was to add eyeballs straight to the mold master so that I can then easily just paint them on to the finished lure. I skipped ahead a little bit and already primered and clear coated the master. I figured it would make the finished product look much nicer. But yeah, here I'm just starting to make the two-piece mold that I will then use to make the hot glue lures. And I'll start off the process by smoothing out the mold clay that I've used to fill up the mold box made from Legos. And for those who are interested, the mold clay used is from Chavant and it's called Le Beau Touché. I really like this stuff too, because you can use it over and over again, so you get a lot of bang for your buck, so that's always a good thing. Now I'm just gonna dig a hole to accommodate the other half of this mold master. Now that I've buried the other half of this mold master into the clay, I'm just gonna make sure that the parting line is going to be as smooth as possible. Alright, now I'm gonna start play with some pink stuff. So first off, I'm going to measure amount of silicone I know from past experience will be enough to fill up the mold box. And for those who don't recognize the mold silicone that I'm using Mold Max 30 from Smooth On. So after that vigorous silicone mixing, there's going to be a lot of bubbles in the silicone that I need to get rid of. So what I usually do is I'll pour a thin layer of silicone on top of the mold master and let it sit there for roughly 5 minutes. That's usually enough time for all of the bubbles to burst, and I can pour in the rest of the silicone. I really should get one of those vacuum chambers at some point. I think it would make my life way more easier. So the next morning when the mold silicone was cured and I peeled off the mold clay, I ran into a little bit of a problem. I noticed that I was completely out of mold release spray, and what I did was I ran into the nearby store, got myself some lip balm, and used that as a mold release. Because I know that it has Vaseline in it, and Vaseline is widely known to be a great release agent. And it actually ended up working really well. Pouring the second half of the mold was pretty much the same as the first layer, so I'm not going to narrate anything here because it's pretty much pointless. So I'll just put up a montage of some sorts. Alright, now that the mold is done, I can start making the baits, but first things first, I need to make the internal wire harness that's gonna be inside the lures. So I figured I would include that part here in the video too, because maybe some of you guys out there might be curious on how I do it. So basically what I have here is 1.2 millimeter stainless steel wire, a pair of round nose pliers and normal pliers to help me make the loops. And basically what I do is I use the mold itself as a measuring gauge on where I need to bend what and how much. Pretty straightforward stuff, as you can see. I'm sure that great many of you out there know that I'm really into tying flies, and pike flies in particular. And with that background, I know that tying thread can be incredibly strong. So it just made perfect sense to me to use tying thread to reinforce the internal harness and make sure that the loops don't open. And the tying thread that I use myself is called Vivus GSB Plus 100 denier. And of course I didn't want the thread to come undone at any point, so I added a generous amount of super glue to make it even stronger. Finally, the time you've all been waiting for has come, and I can start making the hot glue baits. To make sure that the glue will flow well in the mold, I blasted the mold pieces with a hot air gun until they were so hot that it was uncomfortable to keep my finger on the mold. Yes, I know, I'm very scientific with my methods here. So, at this point I had already made a couple of baits, and what I've learned from that was that I had all the time in the world to inject the hot glue into the mold. And if I would try to do it faster than my hot glue gun could melt the glue, I would get a lot of nasty bubbles. So nice and slow gets you the best results here. When I had filled the mold to a point where it was almost full, I added the internal wire harness with the weight attached to it with kind of an L hook system to the hook and line tie slots, and then proceeded in filling the rest of the mold. Now that I had filled both sides of the mold, I blasted them a good 2 minutes to make sure that the glue would melt to a point where they would bond together seamlessly. After 25 minutes, it was time to open the mold and see what I got. Alrighty, it's time to do some painting again, and I'm sure somebody's gonna ask again, what paints do I use? So I use paints from Cap Coatings, soft plastic line, and yes, that is one of my baits on the cover there, so that's pretty cool. So I do endorse these. So what I'm gonna be painting here is gonna be something called a turncoat color, which means one bait has two different color schemes. So I was thinking that, yeah, I could go a little bit wild and do something out of the ordinary, but then I was thinking that, you know what, I want to keep things natural here, so I'm gonna be painting a roach and a perch on this bait. Alright guys, so I think we're gonna start with a swim test, and hopefully you're gonna be able to see something. It's a little bit windy today, but I was able to find a spot where there's not that much wind, and hopefully you're gonna be able to see that it has a nice, almost like a crankbait kind of wobble to it. I weighed a few of these baits that I took with me a little bit differently, so some of them have much wider action than, for example, this one has. But hopefully we're gonna be able to catch something with these today. I'm pretty sure we are gonna be able to. It's kind of cold today too, +2. And I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to see the steam coming from my breath. But yeah, the conditions are pretty good, I'd say. So I'm hopeful that I'm gonna be able to catch something today. But yeah, let's go and do some fishing and try to catch something. Alright, first fish of the day on. And it feels like a feisty one. I don't think it's very big though. You never know. Oh, actually, it is pretty decent. I'd say maybe 1.5 kilos. Might go to 2 kilos too. You know what? This is actually pretty decent for the fish that I usually catch from here. And on the fire tiger. Yeah, that is a nice chunky pike, that's for sure. Alright, let's get it. Well, let's try to get it at least. There we go. Nice pike. This is actually much bigger than 2 kilos, I'd say. Might be pushing 3, but I don't think I will weigh this girl. Actually. Yeah, not a bad pike at all. It says 70, no, it's pushing 80. Nice. Yeah, I'd say this is probably maybe 2.5, maybe 3. But yeah, let's let her go. Won't bother her anymore. Definitely nice start for the day. There you go. See you again. Alright, I switched to a different color. So let's see if this thing works. It's getting a little bit windier here today. Whoa, what the heck was that? Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be able to cast over there. Way too much weeds. But it's good to see that there's some action here. I actually already caught one smaller pike after the first one, but it was so small that I didn't want to even film it. It's maybe hardly like 40 centimeters long, so no real reason to film that one. Oh, definitely see the pike on there. Oh, seems. Oh, exactly. There we go. Whoa! Talk about acrobatics. Jeez. just move a little bit away from the weeds here. Yeah, it's not a huge pike, but I'll take it. Nice little pike. Go back. Be free. Fish on. Oh. Small guy. But feisty. Alright, another fish on. I think it's pretty much the same size as the one I just caught. Oh, well, that was a nice quick release. Alright, finally a fish on. It's not very big, but honestly, I don't care at this point. It's maybe a kilo fish. And it's hooked very lightly, so should be easy enough to let this guy go. Nice little pike. Hopefully I'm gonna be able to get something even bigger than that. Fish on. And I feel like this is a pretty decent fish actually. Ooh. Ooh. Take off the gloves and take in the pike. This is definitely a little bit bigger than the other one I caught. I feel like this is probably 2 kilos or something like that. Yeah, nice little pike. Yeah, definitely didn't need to do any reviving for that pike. Alright, another fish on. Again, not a very big fish, but you know, like I was saying before, I'll take it. It's been really tough today too. Like, only color that seems to work is the fire tiger. Which makes perfect sense because of the weather conditions, but it would be nice to catch something with the other ones too. Nice little pike. Alright, that's all from me now. I hope you learned something new. And for more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. I'm sure I'll come up with something interesting again. And with that, I'll see you guys soon.